Today, Wild West Memories brings you a haunting love story set against the harsh backdrop of the American frontier, where secrets run deep in the bloodline. When Sylvie DeWitt arrives at the Three Canyons Ranch, she doesn't expect a proposal before sunset to lead her down a path that will determine her honor, her love, and her future. This isn't just a romance. It's a declaration we can't choose our past, but we can always choose how we move forward. The wind came low and steady across the Wyoming plains, brushing the grass like a whispered warning. Dust curled around the hem of Sylvie DeWitt's skirt as she stepped down from the creaking stagecoach, her boots hitting the dirt with the weight of more than just exhaustion. Her father had died less than 2 months ago, but the scandal he left behind had arrived ahead of her, as if shame could outrun the dead. She carried with her one valise, a leather-bound book of Chopin nocturnes, and the ghost of a life that had once included lace gloves, garden parties, and grand pianos. None of those things belonged to her now. The man who drove the coach barely nodded before turning his team around. No one else disembarked. No one else came to greet her. Before her, the land stretched wide and unbending. Fences ran like scars across the hills, and at their center rose a ranch house of weathered stone and timber, its roofline sharp against the blue August sky. A hand-painted sign hung near the gate, Calder's Three Canyons Ranch. Somewhere in town, she'd overheard talk about disputed land boundary claims and judges who only rode in twice a month. Sylvie hadn't asked questions then. She would now. She hesitated only a moment, then adjusted her gloves, more habit than need, and started toward the house. The door was answered not by a servant, but by a woman of about 60, with steel gray hair, pinned in a bun, that dared the wind to displace it. Her eyes were cool and sharp, but not unkind. "You the one asking for work?" she said, her voice seasoned with prairie dust and pragmatism. Sylvie nodded. "Yes. My name is Sylvie DeWitt. I was told in town that Mr. Calder might be hiring. I can cook, clean, keep books, teach sew." The woman held up a hand. "You'd best speak to Thorne yourself. Wait here." Sylvie waited. She stood in a hallway that smelled faintly of pine soap and old paper. The floorboards creaked under her shoes. Portraits lined the wall, some solemn, some severe. One in particular caught her eye, a woman in an ivory gown seated at a pianoforte, eyes turned slightly away from the painter as if reluctant to be seen. Her features were hauntingly familiar. Sylvie stepped closer. Before she could study it further, footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. And then he was there. Thorne Calder was taller than she'd imagined, broad through the shoulders, with a bearing that might have once belonged to a soldier, or a man who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. He had the kind of face that seemed carved more than born, with a thin scar trailing from his jawline toward his neck. His dark eyes scanned her, but not kindly. He said only one sentence: "I'll take you on if you marry me before sunset." For a moment, Sylvie thought she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon." Thorne didn't flinch. "I need a wife before sundown. You need work. It's a fair bargain." Sylvie blinked. "Is this some sort of joke?" His gaze didn't waver. "No. You don't know me. Correct. And you want to marry me. Not want, need. There's a difference." Silence hung between them, like dust in the air. Somewhere outside a windmill groaned. A hawk called overhead. She folded her arms. "Is this about immigration, legal standing, inheritance? Because if it's illegal, it's entirely legal and entirely urgent." Thorne stepped past her toward the front door. He opened it, but didn't look back. "You have until the sun hits that ridge. Then the offer expires." He left her there, staring after him, heartbeat thudding like hooves against dry ground. "Miss Hattie, If that was the woman's name, found Sylvie still standing in the hallway, minutes later. "He's not mad," she said matter of fact. "If that's what you're thinking." Sylvie turned startled. "You knew he'd make that offer." Miss Hattie shrugged. "Let's just say it's not the first time desperation has come knocking onto both sides of that door." Sylvie glanced toward the parlor, toward the portrait. "Who is she?" The older woman followed her gaze, her expression softened. "That's Josephine Calder, Thorne's mother. Died 20 years ago." Sylvie's breath caught. She hadn't imagined the resemblance. Miss Hattie's eyes narrowed. "You remind me of her, you know. Maybe that's why he looked at you the way he did." Sylvie bristled. "He didn't look at me anyway. He made a business proposal, a lunatic one." "And yet," Miss Hattie said, her voice low and even, "you haven't walked away." Sylvie said nothing. Because she hadn't. Because some part of her, the part that had crossed hundreds of miles with nothing but a name and a hope, was still standing there considering. That afternoon, Sylvie walked the perimeter of the property thinking. She thought of Philadelphia's marble steps and tea rooms, of the whispers that had followed her at every station after the scandal, of the doors that had quietly closed. She thought of the man in the hallway, with eyes like stone and a voice that didn't shake. She thought of the portrait. And then, as the sun neared the ridge Thorne had pointed to, she turned and walked back to the house. She found him outside, oiling the hinges on a barn door. He didn't look up. "Is it love at second sight?" he asked dryly. "It's desperation with a backbone," Sylvie replied. Only then did he turn. She straightened her shoulders. "I accept." He held her gaze. Then slowly he nodded. "Get your gloves. The judge is in town until 6. We ride now." She followed him to the horses, her heart a hammer in her chest. As she mounted, the leather saddle creaked beneath her. Behind them, the sun bled into the hills. Ahead, the future waited uncertain, but hers to ride into. Sylvie DeWitt didn't know if she'd just saved her future or signed it away. If you love stories filled with depth, mystery, and raw emotion, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Memories so you never miss a journey through heart and dust-blown frontier. Each episode is a new adventure, and just maybe the place where you'll find a piece of yourself. The next morning broke cold and sharp, the kind of Wyoming dawn that scraped against your skin like grit. Sylvie awoke to the sound of boots on porch wood, the murmur of ranch hands already at work, and the distant howl of wind tumbling through the canyon like an ancient secret. She dressed quickly in the plain calico dress Miss Hattie had lent her, and stepped out into the morning, hoping perhaps foolishly that the world would seem less strange in daylight. It didn't. The main house, for all its rustic grandeur, seemed frozen in time. Sylvie wandered the halls as if she were walking through someone else's memory. The furniture was solid oak, polished but worn. Lace curtains hung limp over tall windows. The scent of old books and cedar wood clung to everything like a forgotten song. Then she saw it. At the end of the hall, past a half-open parlor door, a portrait caught her eye. It wasn't the artistry, it was the face. The woman in the oil painting had auburn hair, swept high, delicate features, and eyes that looked as if they'd seen too much. Sylvie felt her breath catch. It was her mother, or at least it could have been. The resemblance was uncanny. She stepped closer, reading the brass plaque beneath it. Clara Calder, 1842 to 1878. Her heart thudded in her chest. "You see it too, don't you?" came Miss Hattie's voice, soft and weathered. She stood in the doorway holding a tray of folded linens. Sylvie turned. "That looks exactly like my mother." Miss Hattie nodded, stepping in. "Clara was Thorne's mother. Died young. Fever took her." "You say your mother's name was—" "Madeline DeWitt," Sylvie replied, voice thin. "But before she married my father, she never spoke much of her past." Miss Hattie placed the linens down on a nearby chair, her eyes narrowing. "What brought you here, Sylvie, really?" Sylvie hesitated. "My father died, left debts. I had nowhere else to go. I heard the West was hiring." The old woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "This house doesn't give up its ghosts easily. Nor do the Calders." Later that day, Sylvie wandered into the study drawn by the promise of solitude and perhaps answers. The room smelled of pipe smoke and dust. Old ledgers were stacked high on the desk. Behind the desk, a built-in cabinet caught her eye. It was ajar. Inside, amid maps and deeds, she found a leather folio marked with a worn gold insignia, E. DeWitt and Company Eastern Holdings. Her father's company. Her hand trembled as she opened it. Inside were letters. Old yellowed correspondence between Edward DeWitt and someone named Caleb Calder, Thorne's grandmother. The words blurred as she read. "Pending land title near the Three Canyons tract. We understand your need for discretion. If your wife refuses to sign over the water rights, we may have to explore alternate solutions." Sylvie slammed the folder shut, her stomach twisting. Her father, her refined, educated father, had been involved in this ranch's past. Worse, in schemes, lies, manipulations that, if these letters were to be believed, had contributed to Clara Calder's downfall. That night at dinner, Sylvie could barely eat. She felt as if every eye was on her, though the ranch hands chatted easily, and Thorne sat in silence, brooding as always. Afterward, she found him outside tending to a lame colt near the stables. "Thorne," she began. He didn't look up. "You settled in yet, Mrs. Calder?" The name struck her like a slap. "Why did you marry me, really?" He straightened, brushing dust from his hands. The light from the stable lantern caught the scar along his jaw. "You know why. The will, the land, the deadline. But you didn't ask any questions. You didn't even know me." His eyes met hers unflinching. "Didn't I?" Sylvie's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Thorne walked past her toward the house, then paused. "I recognized your name the moment you stepped onto this land. DeWitt. I knew who your father was." The air seemed to thin. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see who you were. Not the man who raised you. Not the name. Just you." Sylvie stood frozen, her thoughts spiraling. "And what if I had been just like him?" she asked softly. Thorne turned. "Then I would have let you leave. But I saw something different in your eyes. Something your father never had." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. As he walked back toward the porch, Sylvie remained rooted in place, her soul caught somewhere between guilt, fury, and something else she couldn't yet name. The past wasn't buried. It was here, woven into the walls, etched in scars, whispered in every wind that crossed the canyon. And somehow Sylvie had become part of its reckoning. Part 3, Legacy in the Dust. 2 days after her conversation with Miss Hattie, Sylvie followed a hunch and returned to the library in the main house. Beneath the old writing desk that once belonged to Mrs. Calder, she noticed a small drawer she hadn't seen before. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled it open. Inside was a bundle of old letters carefully tied with a silver ribbon, now frayed with age. The handwriting on the topmost envelope made her breath hitch. Edward DeWitt. Her father's unmistakable penmanship. She opened the letter, and the dark brown ink on the faded paper began to peel back, a past she had never dared imagine. "My dear Margaret, I write this hoping we can still preserve our trust in each other, even as everything spins out of control. Amos and I, we only calculated a little to speed up the land acquisition. I didn't expect Mr. Calder to react so violently. I still believed we could persuade him to relinquish that parcel peacefully. But now I fear." Sylvie folded the letter shut. This wasn't just rumor. Her father, the man she once idolized as a principled gentleman, had conspired with Amos Calder, Thorne's cousin, in a land scheme aimed directly at the Calder family. Not only had it destroyed their reputation, it had pushed them to the edge of ruin. Her heart grew heavy. This, she realized, was the very reason Thorne needed a marriage to hold on to the land. And now she saw the cruel irony. She was the daughter of the man who had shattered his mother's dreams. As the sun dipped low over the ridgeline, she stood on the front porch, letter in hand. Thorne emerged from the stable's, shirt dusted with hay, eyes questioning. "I found this," she said, handing it to him. He read it in silence. His deep blue eyes, usually calm to the point of coldness, were now turbulent beneath the surface. "I didn't know. Not until today," Sylvie said, voice trembling. "If I had known, that's enough." His voice was hoarse. "I don't need another apology, Thorne, please." He turned away without a word, walking back toward the stables. It wasn't an escape. It was a cold retreat, the kind made when trust shatters into pieces too fine to gather. The next morning, the news arrived faster than she expected. Amos Calder, dressed immaculately in a silver-gray suit, with eyes that never smiled, came bearing a formal petition for annulment, filed with the county court. His claim that Sylvie was unfit for marriage on the grounds that her father had committed land fraud, and she was the indirect heir of a traitor. The air in the courtroom that day was suffocating. Thorne sat across from her like a statue, silent, unmoving. He didn't look at her, didn't object, didn't defend. It was that silence that hurt Sylvie more than anything Amos said. She rose to her feet, her voice steady, but echoing through the chamber. "I didn't come to Wyoming to continue my father's deceitful legacy. I came because I believed I could start over. But if my name has become a burden to this man, the man I have begun to love." She turned toward Thorne. For the first time during the hearing, their eyes met. Something softened in his gaze, but it wasn't enough. "Then I will step away." She removed her wedding ring, the same ring Thorne had quietly placed on her hand at sunset the day they met, and laid it on the judge's desk. On the train leaving town, Sylvie sat quietly by the window, the pale sunlight casting a soft glow across her tearless face. She had thought that walking away would bring peace, but her heart felt like stone. Love doesn't always win. Sometimes loving means knowing when to let go. And yet, far in the distance, the Wyoming ski still burned red in the evening light, whispering a question she couldn't answer. Had Thorne Calder truly let her go? Or was this merely the stillness before the storm? The train ride had been quiet, but Sylvie's thoughts were not. As the wheels clattered back toward Cheyenne, under a leaden sky, she no longer saw herself as someone fleeing disgrace. She was coming back not to reclaim anything, but to put an end to what should have never begun. Miss Hattie was waiting at the station, gloves in hand, and a fire in her eyes. "We don't get to choose the blood in our veins," she said, "but we sure as hell get to choose what we do with it." Back at the ranch, Miss Hattie brought down a small velvet box from Clara Calder's old bedroom. Inside, wrapped in faded blue linen, was a ledger and a letter Sylvie had never seen. "Your mother, Madeleine. She fought for the right thing," Hattie said. "She wasn't silent. Your father made sure she'd be forgotten, but she left her truth behind." Sylvie opened the letter, eyes widening as her mother's signature stared back at her in firm, deliberate ink. "I do not consent to this transaction. I warned Edward and Amos. Both, if they go through with this, they do so alone. I am no partner to betrayal. Sylvie DeWitt." Her chest tightened. All these years she'd carried guilt not only for her father's sins, but for what her mother didn't do. And yet here was proof her mother had tried to stop it all and been erased for it. Sylvie stood taller. The legacy she bore had always felt like a burden. Now it felt like a mission. The Cheyenne courthouse brimmed with heat and tension the next morning. Amos Calder smirked from the plaintiff's table, smug in his tailored vest, while his lawyer rifled through papers with practiced arrogance. Thorne sat in the back row, arms folded, eyes fixed not on Sylvie, but on the ledger in her hands. When the judge asked for testimony, Sylvie stepped forward. Her boots echoed on the marble floor. Her voice was clear. This is my mother's written objection to the land deal that took place between Edward DeWitt and Amos Calder. She was a co-founder in her husband's business and was silenced for disagreeing. That silencing continued in this courtroom when my name was used as evidence of deceit. She handed the letter to the judge but didn't step back. I'm not here to escape my bloodline. I'm here to bring it to account. Amos's attorney rose with a scoff. Your Honor, a handwritten letter has no legal bearing in this case. It's a sentimental artifact at best. Sylvie didn't wait for the judge to answer. Is that what you called my mother, Mr. Whitlow? Sentimental, she warned them. She tried to stop it. And then she was sent away, erased, just like I've been told to disappear. Not anymore. Her words cut the room clean. I didn't marry for gain. I married to survive. But I stayed because I chose this place. I chose him. And now I choose the truth. The judge, a stern man, with years etched into his brow, finally spoke. This court finds no legal wrongdoing on the part of Mrs. Calder. Her marriage stands, and her land rights are affirmed. The petition for annulment is dismissed. A few gasps rippled across the room. Amos's jaw tensed, but there was nothing left to say. The law had spoken, and this time justice didn't come dressed in blood, but in truth. Sylvie walked outside into the crisp wind, a storm breaking behind her as the sun fought to return. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. You didn't owe us that fight, Thorne said, voice low. But you fought anyway. She turned slowly. I didn't do it for us, she said. I did it because I'm tired of letting men like Amos tell me who I am. A pause. Then he smiled, faint but real. And who are you, Mrs. Calder? Her chin lifted. Someone who finally gets to choose. He reached into his coat. Not with haste, not with ceremony. Just a quiet offering, a silver ring worn smooth at the edges. The same ring she had left behind. The first time I asked you to marry me, it was for land, he said. Now I'm asking again, but only if you want to stay. Not for legacy, not for guilt, just for me, for us. And then he dropped to one knee. Right there on the courthouse steps, as the Wyoming wind stirred the dust and the sun burst through broken clouds. Sylvie stared at him for a long beat. Then she stepped forward and took his hand, not with hesitation, but certainty. I stayed, she whispered, even when I left. And this time when he slid the ring on her finger, it fit, as if it had always belonged. 1 year had passed since the storm in the courtroom broke, and the skies above Three Canyons finally cleared. The ranch had changed, not in the shape of its hills still rolling like sun-bleached parchment, nor in the winding stream that whispered through its valleys, but in the way it breathed. The air now carried a peace it hadn't known in decades. Near the edge of the northern pasture, where the willows dipped toward the stream, stood a small wooden building, simple, with wide windows and shelves carved from reclaimed barnwood. Inside, the voices of children echoed like sunlight in the morning. Can anyone tell me what justice means? Sylvie asked gently, chalk in hand, eyes warm, as they swept across the small faces before her. A dark-haired boy raised his hand and said, It's when the truth gets to win. She smiled. Exactly. The little schoolhouse had been her idea, born in the quiet days after the storm, when she realized that not all legacies are written in deeds and courtrooms. Some are planted in young minds, traced in soft white chalk on blackboards. Parents wrote in from 20 miles away, most of them never having gone to school themselves. But they came for their children and for Sylvie. Once her name had been spoken with scandal. Now it meant hope. The lavender garden was in bloom again. Just south of the main house, beneath the sheltering porch, rows of soft purple danced in the afternoon light. Bees hovered between them, like tiny seamstresses weaving time into fragrance. It had been Thorne's idea. One spring morning, he had found his mother's old journal, its pages fragile, the ink still bold. A garden she had written, not for show but for soul. A place to remind us that healing comes in color. He hadn't said a word, just picked up a spade and started breaking the soil one blister at a time. Now, when the western wind stirred the fields, the scent of lavender drifted across the ranch, like forgiveness. Sylvie stood at the edge of the corral, her fingers brushing the weathered leather of a familiar journal, the one she had kept since her first day here. Across the paddock, Thorne knelt beside a small boy, guiding his tiny hand around the grip of a hammer. The child, no more than 8, was the son of one of the ranch hands. His eyes shone with that quiet awe children reserve for the strongest person they know. "Hold it steady," Thorne said, his voice low, but kind. "Let the nail find the wood before you strike." The boy nodded, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth as he followed the instructions. Sylvie smiled. There had been a time when Thorne would have ridden past this scene without stopping. A time he mistook gentleness for weakness. But not anymore. Love hadn't softened him. It had made him whole. She opened her journal to the final page. The pen hovered for a moment, then moved with calm certainty. "I came to this place to outrun the past. But I found a future instead, and a man waiting for me at the edge of the sunset." She closed the book and drew in the lavender-scented air. Behind her, laughter rang from the schoolhouse. Ahead in the corral, a boy drove a nail into fresh wood, while a quiet man watched with quiet pride. And between them, 3 canyons stood not as a battlefield, but as a beginning. I don't quite know why I feel so deeply connected to Sylvie DeWitt's story, a woman who seemed fragile against the harshness of the frontier, yet carried within her a quiet, unyielding strength. Maybe it's because I too have tried to run from something. I too have once carried the shame that wasn't mine, to bear the burden of someone else's past, placed squarely on my shoulders. Watching Sylvie stand in that courtroom, her deep eyes no longer trembling, I didn't just see a character, I saw myself. I saw every woman who's ever had to fight to be seen for who she is, not for the name she bears, or the mistakes that she never made. And Thorne, the stoic man with a heart that never truly stopped bleeding. His love for Sylvie didn't bloom from sweet words or grand gestures. It was quiet, tormented and matured through forgiveness and a second choice, not for land but for love. When I read that final line, when Sylvie writes that she found a future and a man waiting at the edge of the sunset, my heart slowed. Not because their story was perfect, but because it was real. They chose each other, not out of fate, but because they were brave enough to turn back, to face the truth, and to choose forgiveness. Maybe that's what makes a love story truly stay with you, not perfection, but the choices made, when it feels like there's nothing left to choose.